Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with the South African Morning. Now, police misconduct, recklessness and sheer brutality is costing South African taxpayers millions in civil claims against the state. The latest SAPS annual report indicates that 13,000 claims against police misdemeanors cost the state over 470 million rand. And for this, or rather reaction on this, we joined by the Institute for Security Studies, Gareth Newham. Gareth, thank you so much for joining us. Just looking at what's going on in the country, burning of trucks. It seems that there's no crime intelligence, as we heard previously from our callers as well, wanting to pinpoint the cause and the root of the problem. In your view, what is going on?
Well, there's clearly groups of people and criminal networks that are intent on disrupting certain trucking routes, particularly, potentially, I don't have enough inside information on this, but potentially targeting specific kinds of trucks or specific trucking companies so as to disrupt them. It could be because of internal conflict in order to drive them off the roads so that they can then take over that route. But we don't really know, because at the moment we haven't had any clear statements from the police, who are tasked with investigating these incidents, or should have the intelligence behind what's happening here to give us a clear indication. So at this point, all we do know is that there are criminal groups that are attacking trucks on our major freeways, causing massive disruption and potentially undermining our economy. That's already been said by the various formal trucking associations. So this is a very serious form of economic sabotage. It's incredibly bad for the country and should be, of course, along with organized crime, one of the key priorities for the police to get on top of.
Yeah, and that's exactly, do we have these specialized skills and even departments or task teams to deal with this kind of what you seem to indicate as a syndicate, an organized, deliberate attempt to destabilize the country and, protect their turf?
We do have quite vast crime intelligence resources. According to the information given by the South African Police Service to the Treasury, for example, there are around or close to 4,000 people working in crime intelligence in the South African Police Service, and they have an annual budget of close to 4 billion rand a year, which is about the same size as the entire National Prosecuting Authority. But whether they're using those resources effectively, whether they are able to operate in such a way that they are infiltrating these networks, is an open question. Given that we are seeing these attacks and that there are frequent attacks at the moment, and this is not the first time we've been seeing attacks on trucks going back many years, it suggests that these resources are not being effectively used. Because if they were, after years of infiltrating criminal networks associated to attacks on trucks and on trucking associations, surely they would be able to prevent these things from happening in the first place, or if they couldn't prevent them, have a very good idea who's behind them, and we should be seeing people standing in courts and being convicted for serious crimes, and that's not happening. So it suggests that those vast resources are not being effectively used, or certainly not being used to deal with this type of crime.
And let's now look at the logistics companies. As we know, they are the employer and would probably choose a labor that is less costly, for lack of a better word, and that doesn't have the unionized protection that South African truck drivers would have. Do you think that also creates that environment, the impetus why we see these turf wars, because employers or logistics companies choose the cheap labor or the cheap option of employing illegal foreigners?
Well, that's certainly been an excuse that's been given, although there are various other ways of addressing this problem. If you're working in South Africa, you certainly can be subjected to our labor laws and standards, and if people are not that's not happening, then it's very, there are various routes to deal with that, certainly make it clear and so forth. But I don't think that's the main reason here, because some of these trucking associations and trucks that have been attacked don't, and those drivers that, we have sometimes lost their lives or sometimes been forced out of their trucks and lost their jobs, are not foreign nationals. So if you're trying to make a point about foreign national truck drivers and you're destroying local jobs and local trucks and local economies and increasing joblessness in South Africa, it seems to be quite a self-defeating way of going about it, when there are other avenues to engage with trucking companies, to engage with government, the Department of Labour and so forth, to make sure these concerns are addressed. So I think that's just an excuse. I think that's just sidetrack people to thinking that there's something perhaps legitimate behind this. But even if it was the motivation, it's, as I said, certainly not helping the cause. It's undermining the country. And so I think this is really more about criminality and organized crime than about issues to do with foreign truck drivers. And those groups that are using this to do that should be the starting point for any kind of crime intelligence investigations, because they're probably linked to it.
All right. So, Gareth, let's talk about the money spent that you and I as taxpayers now foot or pay to the crime victims at the hands of police. Police brutality, we've seen it with the VIP protection incident on the N1 a week or so ago. We've seen it with many other cases where police were acting as a law unto themselves. How much are we talking about exactly, and the number of cases involved just for this financial year alone?
Well, for the most recent figures we have from the South African Police Service for the last financial year, in their annual report released at the end of last year, it was 479 million rand we paid out to victims of unlawful police conduct. And they received just over 13,000 civil claims for police misconduct. This is not a new problem. This really started increasing quite substantially over a decade ago, about 11 years ago, when the police already at that stage, in 2011, 2012, were paying 105 million rand to victims of police misconduct. And it reached a peak actually in 2019-20, when it was 570 odd million rand, so well over £500 million. In the last 5 years alone, the South African Police Service have had to pay 2.3 billion rand to victims of unlawful police conduct. And that is 52% higher than the previous 5 years, ending in 2017. So it's been a long, ongoing problem of a lack of police accountability, routine police misconduct for well over a decade. And clearly, we're not seeing any plans that are working to get on top of this problem. So that blue light incident is not unusual for South Africa's problem with police brutality and other unlawful police behavior, which completely undermines the hard work of many dedicated men and women in uniform, because it's resulted in a collapse of public trust in the police. We know from various surveys that only 1/4 of South Africans or people in South Africa have any level of trust in the police. So those individual police officials who are committing these types of brutality, corruption, and other crimes are devastating the public trust in the overall organization. And unfortunately, for some reason, the mechanisms for dealing with this, the internal South African police disciplinary system and the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, do not have the resources and are not operating anywhere close to functional so that they can address this problem and restore trust in the police. And that's something that really needs to be an urgent priority, because this is not unique. This just happened to be caught on camera.
All right, Gareth, really appreciate your time indeed and your insights. That's Gareth Newham from the Institute for Security Studies, and you're welcome to interact with us on social media. Just reflecting that in the past decade or so, you and I, as taxpayers, have been paying the bill for police misconduct and misdemeanors afflicted on victims or South Africans as well, 2.3 billion rand. So let that sink in.